Welcome to FuturePMO.
Thank you for joining me today. I'm Marisa Silva, and today we are going to go on a hunt for what good governance looks like for Agile delivery. I'm sure you have seen it before. How it usually goes is that we either have too much governance and then nothing moves, or too little governance and then everything moves, usually in the wrong direction, unfortunately. So today we are going to see what is that sweet spot that will allow us to have just enough governance for Agile delivery. And no dinosaurs were harmed in the doing of this presentation. About me, I'm a senior consultant at Wellingtone, but I think that the thing that you need to know is that I'm a PMO nerd. I do like my governance, but then in the right way, as I'm sure you do. So today, we are going to go on a journey to see when governance goes wrong. So some examples of bad practices to get us started. Then also what minimum viable governance looks like. You may have heard of minimum viable product. If you have been in one of our PMO courses, perhaps even minimum viable bureaucracy. So today we are going to see what is that minimum controls that are needed to ensure just enough is applicable to Agile governance. And then we'll also refer to how to build that minimum viable governance and how to create a roarsome PMO model. So welcome to the PMO Park, where we have magnificent creatures, our Agile projects, sometimes terrifying creatures too. So today, working in PMOs, we are going to see what is that middle ground that would allow us to build a thriving ecosystem where we are providing the right conditions for those amazing creatures to succeed. So creating one where we are providing freedom, but also providing safety for those projects and the Agile teams to exist and to thrive. But before we go there, talking about dinosaurs in Jurassic Park, I'm just curious, what type of dinosaur are you? Are you Stegosaurus, slow but steady, T-Rex, terrifying but powerful, a Velociraptor, fast and clever, or maybe we are a bit of a fossil, acknowledging that we need some evolution? I'm not going to ask for show of hands, just asking to reflect, dare you to think about what could be your case, with the acknowledgement that there's room for improvement, certainly. So we're going to start, first of all, to see when governance goes wrong. Some examples. Have you got to the extreme of seeing, say, 12 approval points to get to a project to start? Or even sometimes when we have 5 or more rounds of approval just to do a feasibility study. That would be an example of too much assurance, and it gets us to delivery paralysis. We can also have the other extreme, which is too little assurance. So in that case, what we have is sometimes no documentation at all, scope creep, and of course chaos coming into those Agile teams. So what we want to have is, for instance, just right approach. 3 checkpoints that will allow us to ensure that we are delivering as expected, according to what is perceived as of value, but without compromising that freedom, that flexibility that we need to give to our Agile teams. In a way, you can think about governance as sun cream. If you put too much, you cannot move. If you put too little, you are going to get burned. So that's why you need to find what is that middle ground that looks just about right. And that brings us nicely to the concept of minimum viable governance. So minimum viable governance refers to what is the smallest ecosystem of controls needed to deliver, as you can see there on the screen, safely, predictably, and effectively. Nothing more. So what is that minimum unit of governance that would allow for things to have some structure in place, but without falling into a total chaos? For it, we need some ingredients. So good MVG looks like proportionality, ensuring that we have the right controls based on what the level of risk and complexity of our projects. Also, value-driven. We should have controls in place and governance in place that is actually protecting the value or driving value on those projects. And finally, visibility. When it comes to good governance, I don't think that governance needs to roar, using the theme of our conference. Good governance is the one that is invisible. It just works. So it provides confidence to our stakeholders. They can trust what you are showing them. But for the teams on the ground, they just use it. So it's invisible to those teams. Also, governance shouldn't be one size fits all. Project management, at the end of the day, is contextual. So recognizing what works for you, how to turn best practices into best fit practices is what we would advise. It's a living organism, if we are again to use the conference theme. And it should therefore adapt. So for that, we need to understand what are the non-negotiable principles. What are the ideas, the concepts, the principles, therefore, those natural laws, that we are always going to apply, regardless of the size of the project, regardless of the delivery method. Once you do those, and we are going to see some examples shortly, we'll also need to have adaptive controls. So say, for instance, if I have a small project, 50K on a pilot, a digital pilot, I'm not going to apply the same level of controls if it is a 50 million infrastructure program, okay? So no, one size fits all does not work. We need to adapt. Otherwise, we'll just get extinct. And we also need to consider emergent practices. It's the world of Agile. We want to experiment, we want to test, we want to fail early and see what works, what doesn't, and learn from that experience. So we need to be open for that type of flexibility, with its own risks, but also its own innovation. Let's see each of those now in more detail. Starting, first of all, with this idea of what is the non-negotiable. What are the principles that are fundamental? So first of all, please do not use the same approach to all projects. Of course, if you are just starting in your project management journey, that makes sense. You want to introduce standardization, but at some point, you'll have the law of diminishing returns. So that level of tailoring would be necessary. So let's not clone the entire dinosaur, let's indeed tailor our approach. Because indeed, there are some governance pieces that just should be in the museum, like extensive risk registers, business cases with 50 pages or more. Those do not fit in the context of adaptive approaches. In this case, if you prefer, Agile. And then, let's extract what is fundamental, the DNA. Whatever should apply always, regardless, again, of the size, the budget, or even the level of risk within that project. Some examples about those non-negotiables, so those governance principles. So we define what those are and then evolve the rest. So you can see some here now in practice on the screen. Transparency. We don't care if you are using this tool or another tool, but we want you to provide us visibility on how your projects are performing. Another one, ownership. Each deliverable having a named accountable person. Basic. That's a project management fundamentals. Or, for instance, that you want to have traceability. So every item in the backlog should link to a benefit, to an outcome, or as you have there, an objective and key result. The other aspect of identifying what MVG looks in practice is about what are the safe zones. So ensuring that we are providing that safe space for the teams to test, to have boundaries as well. So on that topic, what you should have is governance that keeps the danger out rather than locking people in where people don't feel comfortable, that they feel suffocated by governance. So providing them with those fences as guardrails is what we would recommend. So the Agile teams need boundaries that protect rather than stopping them from progressing. We want to enable that agility, but without compromising that creativity. And a practical tip from us would be that this entails also defining, or redefining actually, the approval points as decision points. So we don't work with stage gates, we would work with checkpoints, we would work with those guardrails, as I've just mentioned. Let me show you this in practice again. So for instance, replacing stage gates with decision gates. So approval to progress being based on having sprint metrics available, having actual results to show, rather than just completing a document and saying that, yes, I've completed those documents as my minimum governance requirements, I'm ready to go. That's not enough. What we need to know or to see is value being provided. The other one is about redefining approvals as decision rights. So rather than just thinking about approvals as an event, a point, let's define again those guardrails. So let's establish what are the tolerances and who are those decision bodies that would be involved. So you can also see an example of that there on the screen, like for instance for product owner and then for a steering group that would be all involved. And finally, the guardrails instead of gates. So based on time box reviews or tolerances would be able to identify what is required and what are the parts that we are going to flex to allow that testing, that opportunity for experimentation to occur without disturbing what is core on the project. Because ultimately, as we have seen this morning, life finds a way. So we don't want to, or we cannot control complexity. What we'll need to do is to adapt, to ensure that we are considering the multiple routes that people can take if we just force them to go to use a single one. So let's work with those teams and learn from them. Listening to what is being said about governance, does it work or not? How can we help them in the PMO is the questions that we should be asking. And this also means co-creating governance. Don't just create a very nice governance structure in your PMO and then sell it to others. Let's actually validate that approach with them. Let's actually be involved on, say, a sprint planning, a retrospective, and listen. As simple as that. So practical tip, in the same way as we ask our projects to run retrospectives, we could consider doing governance retrospectives. So retrospectives with a purpose, which is let's review if our governance works or not. Do we have too many steps to get the project approved? What is the time to make a decision? Is it too lengthy or not? With a view of simplifying where possible. So identifying what is that minimum viable governance. Again, in practice, some examples. The governance retrospectives that I mentioned, so this could be run, for instance, every quarter as a suggestion. Data-driven feedback. Rather than working on assumptions, let's actually look into the data. How much time does it take us to start a project, to move from the moment where design is completed until we start first sprint? Is it as defined as it can be? Can we streamline it? Can we reduce? Can we cut one of the processes that actually just waste rather than adding value? And co-creation workshops. So working with the teams, the Scrum Masters, the Agile teams, to understand what is that we can be optimizing. In practice also, looking now into the full project lifecycle, some examples. So I'm going to show them all at once here on the screen. Of course, this is a generic lifecycle, but just to give you some hints of what this could look like. And again, I should stress that project management is contextual, so we'll need to adapt, to tailor it to your own realities. But as a starting point, I'm sure this could be, I hope, food for thought on how to apply minimum viable governance in practice. So an example for concept, we wouldn't ask for a major business case. We'll have, for instance, a project canvas, or a simple page that would cover the what, why, how, so what of the project. For instance, delivery would have decision gates rather than rather than the usual stage gates, and also the PMO monitoring those tolerances and identifying from those governance retrospectives if there's anything that we need to refine to adapt. So this idea of building minimum viable governance is not one that is static. It's a living process, a living exercise where we'll need to continuously refine based on that feedback, exactly as we encourage people to do work in Agile ways of working. So how to build it? A couple more tips from us. So define the why on each control. What is the purpose? Can this be eliminated? Is this actually protecting us in terms of risk and adding value or not? Automate evidence collection where possible. We are using, I'm sure, tools PPM solutions, Excel-based, flows, whatever those are, Jira, etc. Let's look into the data to inform those decisions on how we can streamline. And just apply the Agile philosophy yourselves. So let's start simple, using a pilot, doing an experiment, and then after doing it on one single project, let's then roll out to others as needed. Time to decision would be another one that I want to highlight as a useful metric when we think about governance. And then iterate. Think of it as a software release. We need to test it first, we need to document it, and then we are going to release batch by batch. Success, as I was mentioning before, has to do with visibility. Does it show as invisible to the Agile teams, but at the same time visible and providing that confidence to the stakeholders or not? So that's how you'll know that your governance is on spot. And this would then help us to build a roarsome PMO model. The PMO is not the warden of the park. It shouldn't have a function of control. Our role is one of being an enabler, ensuring that we are creating an ecosystem where projects can flourish, where they have our advice on what is suitable in terms of governance. So a vibrant, innovative, yet safe ecosystem, so that we don't go into chaos, as we mentioned before. The PMO, therefore, would take different roles in practice. One, which is the role of the curator, so ensuring that we are simplifying where possible. The role of the coach, so this could be running those retrospectives, clinics with the different teams to understand what works and what doesn't. A connector, ensuring that those bridges to what are the deliverables in the project and what are the outcomes that you want to achieve from it are set and are as clear as possible. A custodian as well, so ensuring that the non-negotiables are there, the principles that we have seen before. And a catalyst, so measuring and improving as a result. If your PMO helps teams to deliver with adaptiveness, with agility, without surprises, and making that work invisible, that's where you know that we have found your minimum viable governance. So from me, I just want to share one key message, and that is indeed to think about how to make governance invisible from what we have seen here today. Governance shouldn't be about process. It's about having that safe space, that opportunity for people to innovate, to deliver, but knowing that the core is being preserved. So your non-negotiable aspects within the business. So as key takeaways, defining, for instance, 5 non-negotiables would be a good way to start. So what are those principles that you always want to have, regardless of the size, the level of risk, level of budget of the project? Co-creating those decision rights. Automating evidence. You don't need to start from scratch. As mentioned, very likely you have a tool that you can use for that. Iterate based on what is that feedback that you are getting. And I also have a challenge, which is to drop 1 process rule per quarter. If you were to think now, what is the part that you can strip off? And perhaps people wouldn't even notice, because that would mean that it's not adding value. Okay? So I invite you to reflect and act accordingly. And it's about adding value. If it does not fit that description, then it shouldn't be there. Simple as that. Okay, so thank you very much for joining me.